بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. In the previous aphorism, it was about not abandoning invocation. That the advice that Sidi ibn Ata'illah Secondary gave us, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, wa nafa'ana bih, was that even if we're not fully concentrating in it, that we still have to struggle with it. It's not enough just because of that fact for us to give it up. And the hope is that if we keep remembering Allah Ta'ala, we'll move from a state of heedlessness to attentiveness to presence to the higher stages of dhikr. And in this next aphorism, number 48, he, radiallahu anhu, is going to treat another very important topic. And the relationship between the two is that dhikr, which was previously mentioned, is one of the greatest means for the life of the heart. And this aphorism is really about the heart's life, but he speaks of it in terms of the signs of the heart's death. So this could simply be summarized as two signs of the heart's death. Salam wa afiyah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also bless us all with life and with well-being and with spiritual life and spiritual well-being. And so he says, radiyallahu anhu, min alamati mawti al-qalbi adamu al-huzni ala ma fataka min al-muwafaqat. وَتَرْكُ النَّدْمِ عَلَى مَا فَعَلْتُهُ مِنْ وُجُودِ الزَّلَّاتِ. And this could translate, among the signs of the heart's death are, he mentions two. First, absence of sadness over the acts of obedience you have failed to perform. And this is the second one, abandonment of remorse over the sins you have committed. So when we talk about what is taken as a given, we know that just as there is physical life and the physical body, there are certain factors that must be in place for us to have physical life. And one of those things is food. If you do not eat food, eventually you will die. Without nourishment, without food, without water, you're going to die. And there are other factors as well that have to be present in order for us to have human life in relation to the physical body. And likewise, when we talk about the life of the spiritual heart, just as there's factors that must be in place for us to have physical life, there are factors that have to be in place in order for us to have the spiritual life of the heart, for our hearts to be alive. And it is a sign, if we really think deeply about it, in our time, one of the top, if not the top, killer of human beings is heart disease, physical heart disease. And the lifestyle of the modern world is quite literally killing people. And one of the great reasons is that we don't have the ability to restrain ourselves outwardly in relation to what we eat and how much we eat and so forth and so on. And that is a diet-related disease, which in the vast majority of people can be prevented. And it's a sign, though, given that that lifestyle that people are living outwardly is physically killing them through heart disease. It also points to that same lifestyle, which is darkening their heart and killing them spiritually. This is an eye-opener. And so, just as you have to have a physical diet, you also have to have, if you will, a spiritual diet. And so the spiritual heart, in order for it to have life, it has to have iman, faith. And it has to do a'mal salihah, righteous deeds. And when you deprive it of that nourishment, it dies. And of course, there are other things that you can add to that, of course, like knowledge. Because you can't truly have iman and do righteous deeds without knowledge. So knowledge is definitely one of those components, one of those factors that have to be in place for the life of the spiritual heart. So we have what is called the hayat of the qalb, the life of the heart. And Allah says in Surah Al-An'am, أَوَمَنْ كَانَ مَيْتًا فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ فِي النَّاسِ كَمَنْ مَثَلُهُ فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ لَيْسَ بِخَارِجٍ مِنْهَا كَذَلِكَ زُيِّنَ لِلْكَافِرِينَ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Is a dead person brought back to life by us? So this is not a dead person in the sense that they actually have died and come back to life in the way we normally think of life and death. This is someone who is alive, but they're dead. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought that person back to life and given light with which to walk among people. So if he's still walking among people, he's still alive. Comparable to someone trapped in deep darkness who cannot escape. In this way, the evil deeds of the disbelievers are made to seem alluring to them. So there are certain people that are dead. If you don't have faith, your reality is as if you're dead. If you are steeped in ignorance, the reality is as if you are dead. And when Allah Ta'ala brings you to life with Iman, brings you to life with knowledge, brings you to life with doing good in the world, and then Allah gives you a light. And look at here. وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ فِي النَّاسِ. And this person is given a light with which to walk among people. What the scholars say is that fi, that which we translate here as among, but fi is also in. In other words, the light that comes from the state of this individual that Allah has given this spiritual life will penetrate into the people that are around him or around her. And a similar meaning is we see in a hadith in Al-Bukhari where our Prophet ﷺ said, مَثَلُ الَّذِي يَذْكُرُ رَبَّهُ وَالَّذِي لَا يَذْكُرُ رَبَّهُ مَثَلُ الْحَيِّ وَالْمَيِّتِ. The likeness of the one who remembers his Lord and the one who that doesn't remember his Lord is the like of the alive and the dead. Two very different people. So this is what Allah Ta'ala, this is what our Prophet is teaching us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that if you're in a state of remembrance of Allah, you are alive. If you are heedless, it's as if you're dead. And think about that. If someone's dead, they're not going to be able to benefit you. They're not going to be able to help you. What are they going to do for you? And someone who remembers Allah, what are they going to be able to do? And this is why when that we combine between dhikr and fikr, then our fikr is munawwar with the anwar of dhikr. We combine between good thought, good reflection, and the remembrance of Allah Ta'ala, our thoughts become illuminated. And so Allah says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. They remember Allah standing, sitting, and on their sides, يعني in all of their different states. قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And then they reflect upon the creation of the heavens and the earth. And so if someone doesn't make dhikr of Allah, their tafkir is going to be dhulmani. It's going to be dark. And it's going to harm people. And it's going to bring about evil in the world. And there's degrees of that, of course. And that some people might just really only hurt themselves, but they don't really hurt other people. But in general, is that people who remember Allah often, and then they use their aql, their intellect, to benefit people, then they're going to really bring about abundant good in Allah Ta'ala's creation. But we as believers have to be out and stop being cogs in the wheel. Think about the brain drain in the Muslim world, and that all of the abilities of Muslims and the intelligence of Muslims and all of these incredible abilities that we have as an ummah, and where is it going? And oftentimes it's going to Western companies and that Western political regimes, and that even within their own countries, that failed political regimes, and on and on and on. Where is it going? How much is it really spent trying to understand prophecy and put it into practice, and then call people to this knowledge, and to how much of the intelligence of Muslims and the wealth of Muslims and the strength of Muslims and the ability to put it towards that? Just think of a fraction more of the people would do this, the changes that would happen. So there's what's called the life of the heart. And we know is that every time that we sin, our heart gets darker and darker, and it gets closer and closer to dying. And our Prophet indicated this in a hadith when he said, "Inna al-mu'min idha adhnab," a believer when he sins, "kanat nuqtatun sawda'u fi qalbih." There is a black spot on his heart. فَإِن تَابَ, if he repents, وَنَزَعَ, and refrains from doing that sin, وَاسْتَغْفَرَ, and seeks the forgiveness of Allah, سُقِلَ قَلْبُهُ, his heart will be polished. فَإِن زَادَ زَادَتْ, and that if he increases, then it increases. And that is the rust that Allah Ta'ala mentioned in His book, كَلَّا بَرَّانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, in Surah Al-Mutaffifin. Rather, it is rust upon their hearts from that which they used to earn. So when we talk about death of the heart, we are talking about the heart's inability to live up to its potential. The heart is meant to know Allah. The heart is meant to remember Allah. The heart is meant to long for Allah, to love Allah, to have hope in Allah, and to fear Allah, and trust in Allah, and so forth and so on. And all of the other virtues that we talk about. And the death of the heart is when it's numb in relation to these spiritual realities. So let's do a look at the linguistic breakdown. So, من علامات موت القلب عدم الحزن على ما فاتك من الموافقات وترك الندم على ما فعلته من وجود الزلات. Among the signs of the heart's death are absence of sadness over the acts of obedience you have failed to perform, and abandonment of remorse over the sins you have committed. So, min alamat, and this min is what is known for at-tab'id, and you would translate this as among the signs, meaning that this is not all of the signs. There are more, but these are the ones he felt were most important to mention. And a sign indicates something. And just as you speak of someone who's sick, how do you know you're sick? There's symptoms. And when you go to a doctor, you explain, oh, I have a pain here, or that I have this rash on my skin, or I'm feeling this, or I'm feeling that. If you can't communicate your symptoms to the doctor, how is he going to help you? And likewise is that there's signs of spiritual health, just as there's signs of spiritual decay and sickness. So, min alamat, among the signs of what? Mot al-qalb. Mot is death, and qalb is the heart, of the heart's death. Adam al-huzn, or absence of sadness. Adam is the lack of something. And huzn here is sadness, it is sorrow, it is grief. So you don't have these states of heart over what? Ala ma fataka min al-muwafaqat. Min al-muwafaqat, over the acts of obedience. The muwafaqat here from wafaqa yuwafiqu is to be in agreement with, to conform to. And here to conform to the sacred law and what Allah Ta'ala has commanded us to do and what He has prohibited us from doing. So the muwafaqat here, your ta'at, your acts of obedience. Over the acts of obedience. Min al-muwafaqat ala ma fataka. Min al-muwafaqat ala ma fataka, you have failed to perform. So this word fata is used very eloquently here. And really the meaning behind fata is you had an opportunity to do something, but the time went and you failed to do it. So it's missing an opportunity to have done something. Adama fataka. There was a time that you could have done something, but it's gone. It's gone. Of good that someone could have done. And the last 10 days of Ramadan, once Shawwal enters, khalas, you can't go back. It's too late. It's if there's something that you wanted to have done and you could have done it and you didn't do it, fatak, right? You failed to do it. You missed the opportunity. So it conveys this meaning of missing an opportunity, but it's hard to combine all of that in an English translation. So it translates here, among the signs of the heart's death are absence of sadness over the acts of obedience you have failed to perform, or missed opportunity. وَتَرْكُ النَّدَمِ, an abandonment of remorse. Tark is to leave something, to refrain from something, to not do something. Nadam here is remorse, or you could say regret. That painful like feeling of wishing that you hadn't had done something. Remorse, regret. And our Prophet said, an-nadam at-tawbah. Remorse is the essence of repentance. So an abandonment of remorse over what? Ala ma fa'altuhu min wujud az-zallat. Over the sins that you have committed. Ma fa'altuhu, what you have done. And the wujud of something is the presence of something. In here, the word used for sins is zallat. And so the word zalla in Arabic literally means to slip. Means to slip. But you can also say is that zalla and nisab and haraf is that they moved away from the truth. Moving away from what is right. Deviation. Or you could say that it's to make a mistake. Someone that made a mistake in relation to something he said or a view that he had or something like that. But here it means al-ma'asi. So he refers to al-muwafaqat as ta'at, as acts of obedience. And the zallat here, they mean in the context of this hikmah, sins. And so some people will translate that in abandonment of regret over the mistakes you have made. And that works, that translation, but the commentators point out that these zallat are sins. These are acts of disobedience. And with different people, there might be various degrees of severity of sin and so forth. So it's not necessarily the translation is wrong, but that's how we understand that word. So now let's look a little bit more closely at some of the meanings. So the sign that someone is living is that they feel. Okay? That if once that you die, you don't have any more what's called ihsas. You have no more feeling. Right? Meaning the way that people feel like while they're alive. And yes, your ability to feel remains with you when you enter into the realm of the grave, into the barzakh, and remains with us on Yawm al-Qiyamah and then eternally in one of the two final abodes. But while we're living here, just as physically, we have an ability to feel, and we have 5 senses. That likewise, there is a sense, the 6th sense, which relates to the heart. And the heart can feel, the heart can perceive. But if, for instance, that your nose is congested, you might not have the ability to smell the scent of whatever it is that is before you. That if your hand, qadra, is burned, you're not going to necessarily be able to feel. Or you've cut yourself pretty bad, you might lose feeling in a couple fingers or something like that. And your eye could become impaired, your ear could become impaired, that your taste buds, if you have a swollen tongue and bumps on your tongue, that if you're ill, you might not be able to taste. And so when you're ill, you don't have the ability to perceive with your senses like you normally do. And likewise, when the heart is ill, that's the same thing that happens. And this is much more serious because you might be cured of your physical illness, but the repercussions of not being cured of our spiritual illnesses are that incomparably greater. So the scholars then mention there are 3 things that lead to the death of the heart. And these are 3 most important things. It might be that this list could be expanded. The first is hubb ad-dunya, love of this world. And maybe you want to add to that unbridled love of this world. We all love the world. We all love to exist, but striving against that, trying to detach, trying to do what is right. And it is permissible to want to live longer for the sake of doing more good, but you have to be careful there. Is that really the reason, or are you just attached to it? But this forms a very strong attachment in the heart to the world when we love it. And little by little, we have to start severing that connection and replace love of this world with love of the hereafter, love of meeting Allah, love of entering into the final abode of the pleasure of Allah, and love of gazing upon the noble countenance of Allah in the hereafter. So this is the first, love of the world. This will kill the heart to the degree that it seeps in. وَالْغَفْلَ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, being heedless of the remembrance of Allah. So failing to remember Allah, not praying, not invoking Him, not supplicating Him, and so forth and so on. Is it being in a state of heedlessness? And the third is إِرْسَالَ الْجَوَارِحِ فِي مَعَصِي اللَّهِ, is letting your limbs loose in acts of disobedience. So just doing whatever it is that you want to do. And whether those be acts of disobedience with the feet or with the hands or with the tongue or with the whatever. And so these three things will kill the heart and bring about its death. And just as the heart has three overarching cures that are means for its life. And the first is az-zuhd fi dunya, it's the opposite of hubb dunya, is that we slowly start to detach. And the way that we detach is that we replace that which is inferior with which that is superior. And when you start to find joy in praying and take pleasure in remembering Allah, you realize that you feel so much better than whatever it is that you were doing. That people take very expensive vacations and go to that all different types of places and spend thousands of dollars. And someone that finds intimacy in the remembrance of Allah is alone in a small closet in a dark room with no one around. And the gardens and meadows of joy that they're experiencing are so much greater than what these other people are experiencing. There's no comparison whatsoever. Subhanallah. And it's just really interesting to note that the fuqaha, at least the Shafi'iyah, when it comes to taking a trip solely for the sake of nuzha, right? You're just going out for like a vacation and you're not making any other intention, is that some of them are strict and say that you actually can't shorten your prayers for that. There has to be a purpose. There has to be a reason that you're going for. And so if you combine an intention of da'wah Allah or to that be good to your parents or to do something else, then that's different. But just the idea of, I'm not saying that we don't take vacations, and I'm not saying we don't take time off. The point here that we're making in the context of spiritual wayfaring is what people are seeking through those types of things, what these people receive are much greater. And so zuhd, you're replacing that which is inferior with that which is superior. In the dunya, let alone the hereafter. And we've all heard the verse, Allah bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. Is it not through the remembrance of Allah that hearts find tranquility? That is a reality. This is why we have to be people of dhikr. And we'll come back to this when we talk about one of the great cures, actually shortly, actually now. وَالِاشْتِغَالِ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ is the second means of the heart's life, is that you preoccupy yourself with Allah's remembrance. So making abundant remembrance. We just had a retreat last weekend on book 9 of the Ihya al-Madin, Kitab al-Adhkari wa Da'awat, the book on invocations and supplications. And what came out of that is the importance of the remembrance of Allah. And it has an amazing section at the end of chapter 1 where he talks about why dhikr, even though it's very easy to do upon the tongue, it has such a great merit. The secret of its merit is in that when you struggle with yourself and you habituate it to love to make dhikr, and you start to find intimacy in the meanings of remembrance. What happens is if you keep doing that, it leads your heart to be overwhelmed with the love of Allah. And it actively detaches you from this world and prepares you for the meeting with Him. And he says that love and that intimacy remains with you in the grave when all of your relationships and all of your attachments to this world are severed. And so if we habituate our hearts to that now, by doing righteous deeds, but especially making dhikr, when we enter into the grave, it's going to be very different. It's not going to be as lonely. On the contrary, what he says is now it's as if that you've gotten out of the prison. And now it's as if that you are alone with no interruptions with your beloved. Here in the dunya, that, subhanAllah, that even if you use the night well, Fajr is going to come. And yes, you should be excited to pray, but as one of them said, for 40 years, nothing brought me grief except the break of dawn. Not because he didn't want to pray, but because the time ended for him to be alone with his beloved. Daytime comes, khalas. You have to be like lions and like knights. You have to help people. You have to be patient with people. You have to serve people. You have to go out and earn a livelihood. There's a whole bunch of things you have to do during the day. But then you long and you're waiting for the night. And this is why that the Salihin that tended to like winter better than summer, because winter was a time that the nights were longer and they have more opportunities to be in a state of worship in munajat, intimate conversation with Allah Jalla Jalaluh. So that is the second. So zuhud fi dunya, detaching from the world, preoccupying yourself with the remembrance of Allah, wa suhbatu awliyaillah, and taking the companionship of the righteous. Here he mentions the awliya, but the righteous, the best people that are available to you in your particular locale. And if there's not people like this, you take the companionship of them by loving them and reading their stories every single day. Attach your hearts to the biographies of the awliya. Read them daily. Alhamdulillah, we have multiple books now that you can start reading. Every time you finish, reread it. We have hundreds and hundreds of pages now in English of biographies. So even if you can't access the Arabic, or that you can't speak Farsi or Urdu or Turkish and many of these other languages, we have there's a vast biographical literature. In English, it's available. This is what we should be reading. Attach your hearts to the righteous and the stories of the righteous and the miracles, the breaking of the karama, the breaking of the norms of the righteous, and that the words of the righteous and the prayers of the righteous and the actions of the righteous and the understandings of the righteous and so forth and so on. All these amazing benefits that come from reading their books. Suhbat awliyaillah. And it's interesting here, he mentions that as the opposite in a sense of being in a state where you just are disobeying Allah, setting yourself loose. Because if you're in their presence, even if you have bad thoughts, is that you're protected. It's one of the greatest ways of all to help us be in a state of goodness. And over the weekend, there was a riwayah that of the Prophet David alayhi salam, and that the meaning of which was, he says, "Oh Lord, is that if you see me walking by a gathering where people are remembering you, break my leg." May Allah Ta'ala remind us, that's his station. May Allah Ta'ala fi khair wa lutf wa afiyah give us a gentle reminder and give us tawfiq to be in gatherings of remembrance, both in formal sessions of learning and in gatherings where we are invoking him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and sending salawat upon his Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But that was a prophet, because he realized how great these break my leg, so I can't go any further, and I'll know to go back to the gathering. That's the station of the Prophet David alayhi salam. So, suhbat awliyaillah. So we've spoken about the 3 signs of the life of the heart and the 3 signs of the death of the heart. Sorry, we've spoken about the 3 signs of the death of the heart and then the 3 signs of the life of the heart. And, sorry, let me rephrase that. That the 3 causes of the death of the heart we spoke about. And we just spoke about the 3 causes of the life of the heart. Now we're going to move to the signs of the death of the heart. And 2 of them that Ibn Ata'illah mentions here. And that is when we have an absence of sadness over the acts of obedience we have failed to perform. And the second is abandonment of remorse over the sins we have committed. And some authors like Sidi Ahmed Nawajiba say is that taking the companionship of heedless people that they're in reality they're dead. And so when we recognize is that there are signs here, we recognize is that when a servant is in a state of obedience, this is a sign of felicity. Just as an act of disobedience and being in a state of disobedience is a sign of perdition. And so if the heart is alive with knowledge of Allah and with Iman, necessarily it will pain the heart doing various things that will lead to their perdition, just as their heart will be filled with joy when they know that they're doing things that will lead to their felicity. Okay? Or you could say, is that when we are in a state of obedience, when the servant is in a state of obedience, it is a sign that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is content with someone. So this is deep. And sometimes people think of ta'ah and ma'asi in a very basic way. And like, oh, here they're going again talking about obedience. That's a mistake. The essence of this matter is about obedience and disobedience. This is what the whole affair is about. Because when someone is in a state of disobedience, it's a sign that they are likely going to receive the wrath of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And yes, if you have Iman, that Allah Ta'ala could forgive someone. But we want to do everything that is that we can. Proper belief, proper action, in hopes that Allah Ta'ala forgives us. So the heart that is alive feels and is sensitive to what pleases Allah. And thus it will that be happy with what pleases Allah. And the heart is sensitive as well, if it is alive, to what displeases Allah. So it will have huzn, it will have sorrow, and grief, and sadness. And so that if there was acts of goodness that we could have done, we missed the opportunity. We know those are things that would have pleased Allah. So we're sad that we missed that opportunity. And just as things that we know that we've done, that we shouldn't have done, that are setting us up, nas'alullah to receive the wrath of Allah, may Allah forgive us and bless us all to receive His good pleasure, is that we start to worry. We should have remorse and regret. But if we don't have that worry or remorse or regret over doing things, committing sins, things that we know that we've done, it's a sign that something's wrong with the heart. So if the heart is alive and healthy, it's going to feel. And it's going to feel a sense of joy when we worship Allah. And it's going to feel that great regret when we disobey him. And this is mentioned explicitly in a hadith of our Prophet ﷺ, narrated by Imam Ahmad and An-Nasa'i. Is that our Prophet said, "Man sa'atu sayyi'atuh wa sarratuhu hasanatuh fahuwa mu'min." Whoever is saddened by bad deeds they perform, and that overjoyed by good deeds that they do, that is a believer. So if we're troubled by sin and we are made to be happy by doing good deeds, our Prophet said, فَهُوَ مُؤْمِن. That is a believer. That is a sign that the heart is alive. And in a hadith in Al-Bukhari, narrated by Ibn Mas'ud, إِنَّ الْمُؤْمِنْ يَرَى ذُنُوبَهُ كَأَنَّهُ قَاعِدٌ تَحْتَ جَبَلٍ يَخَافُ أَنْ يَقَعَ عَلَيْهِ. The believer sees his sins towering over him like a mountain that he is worried that it's going to topple over on him. And the fajr, the disobedient believer, is the one who sees his sins. When al-fajr yara dhunuba kadhubaban marra ala anfih, is like someone who sees a fly just pass by his nose. Right? In other words, is that, yani, it's not a big deal. Oh, it's a fly. Let's just shoo it away. But what a difference. The believer is that it's like a mountain is about to topple on top of them, topple on them, and crush them completely. And the believer is just like, oh, just whatever. They're not concerned. So this is something we need to think about. And we don't want to go to extremes where we have so much fear that it leads to, yes, despair. Nor do we want to have so much hope that it leads to feeling safe from the punishment of Allah. We want to be balanced, and this is now approaching the next aphorism that he's going to speak about. But he first wanted to talk about these two signs so that we can hopefully have our hearts be restored to health and to that be living and to sense what they are meant to sense. And that when this is the case and you and I have grief and we are sad by opportunities that we missed, what happens when we have that sadness? It should motivate us to get ourselves together, to roll our sleeves up, and to do what is pleasing to Allah. So there's a sadness that comes from the nafs, and there's a sadness that comes from the heart. And sadness from the nafs is like, oh, that I could have done this, I could have done that. I'm such a terrible person. I'm just worthless. There's nothing I can do. Yes, you should think that you're worthless and terrible. That's healthy. If that it's stemming from the heart, not from your nafs. And the determining factor there is that are you motivated to do something about it? If you're just dwelling on it and like, but you're not doing anything about it, it's a sign that's from the nafs. That if it's true huzn, if it's a healthy sadness, you're going to roll up your sleeves and do what it is that you can to get yourself together. And when it comes to remorse, is that remorse is important. Why? Because Imam al-Ghazali says in book 31 of the Ihya Ulumuddin, is that when someone's committed a sin, there's one of two options. It's either burned away with the fire of remorse or the fire of the hereafter. May Allah Ta'ala protect us and preserve us. So remorse is not a comfortable feeling. Sometimes people think about something that they've done and they run away from it because it's so uncomfortable. But remorse is important because remorse burns the sin away. As we mentioned, it's the essence of repentance. And again, the point there is not just to have remorse, where you don't do anything about it. Is that remorse that burns that sin away and you do everything you can possibly do to avoid falling into that sin again. And if you fall into that same sin, again though, even the same day, remorse. remorse. Make an intention never to do it again. And die doing that, i.e., having remorse for our mistakes and asking Allah to forgive us for the sins we know of and the sins that we don't know of. And from the bounty of Allah, the hope is that if there's sins that we continue to fall into, from having that remorse solely for our sake, doing the best that we can, continuously repenting to Him, being around good people, putting ourselves in situations that are good for us, the hope is Allah will take us out of that. But we have to at least die trying. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make all of our hearts alive and bless us to be people who obey Him in all of our different estates and avoid all acts of disobedience. Ya Arhamar Rahimin, may be from the elect of those who love Him and who remember Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may Allah ta'ala sever our attachments to this world fi khairin wa lutfin wa afiyah, and to bestow upon us His great bounty in the way that He bestows His bounty upon the elect of the awliya and the salihin. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.